In this particular episode, we're going to be talking about workplace efficiency. And I think some of the previous episodes, we've talked about some of the challenges and issues in the work that we all do. But what we are trying to do in this episode, I think, is trying to help people that feel bogged down, that feel as though they're never moving forward and they're never sort of making progress. And the approach that you and I are both big fans of, I know, Scott, this is your thing, is the agile mindset. And we want to explore that in this podcast. And what I want to do from a psychological perspective is just to emphasize that the more rigid we are with our plans and our processes, the more stress that can cause. So for me, from a psychological perspective, agile helps that sort of well-being and productivity thing. So really, Scott, this is your thing. And as an expert in agility, what's your take on this approach, agile approach?
So I'll start with something controversial, because one of these, agile and agility kind of gets thrown around a bit in businesses. And I think it's important to get back to the basics and the core of it and what it is about. And I'd like to start with something I stole from a friend. It's quite controversial. And it's, if you are doing something you've never done before, if you've delivered a project on time, on budget, and on scope, you failed. And
Wow.
whilst that's quite extreme, the ethos behind that is, generally, if you're doing something new, there's always unknowns. There's always opportunities that you may want to seize. There may be challenges that you don't foresee coming.
Yeah.
And the way project used to be done traditionally was making all the assumptions up front, writing them down, fixing them, locking people away in a room for X amount of months and years sometimes, and then launching something, and then wondering why it doesn't work while the world around you is changing. So agility is about saying, actually, you need to have flexibility. You need to be open to change. You need to be flexible. You need to be willing to take new opportunities as they come along. And that keeps you competitive in a world that, as we know, is rapidly and always changing. So this kind of linear approach to projects and delivering work is really kind of old hat. Now, there is still a place for that when you're doing repeatable things you've done before, where things are predictable. But in a lot of work that we're talking about and our listeners are dealing with, like knowledge work, you're not in a predictable world anymore. So what we're trying to give people here is the ability to have that flexibility, deal with all the demands that are coming at them, and find a way through that and be highly effective. And just to give some stats around it, 87% of organizations report that adopting some agile mindsets and approaches have improved their ability to manage changing priorities.
Okay.
That was going back to 2023. Now, as I alluded to at the beginning, there's also a lot of bad agile out there. And I'm going to be a bit more positive on this episode and talk about the good stuff here. But what I'm saying is, without laboring the point too much, and as we'll cover today, it's not just about following processes blindly. It's having the right mindset. And that's what we're going to explore in a bit more depth.
Yeah, completely. And I think I came across Agile probably maybe 20 years ago. And for me, and perhaps for a lot of people listening to this, I thought Agile was this sort of system of, processes, and people, we'll talk about this as well later on, things like the daily stand-up. And for me, Agile was very much at that time a series of habits and things you did through a sort of systematic way. And what I've realized, and this is what the literature talks about in terms of from a psychological perspective, is Agile, and I know you're a big fan of this, Scott, is a mindset. It's an attitude. It's this approach to projects. It's this approach to your work that is not about, ironically, being fixed in how you tackle things. And for me, the switch that happened for me is, and I would ask anybody listening to this, if you can think of any project that you've worked on recently, or a project that failed maybe, if you had a more open culture, if you had a more trusting team, people who were communicating with each other and being flexible in their approach, would that project have succeeded or been more successful than it already was? And if you said yes, and I can't think of many people who would say no, we wanted less communication, less flexibility, more closed attitudes. If you think that yes, that would have been a good thing, then that's being agile. And as I say, I think for me, the switch from agile isn't just this set of, sort of formalities and set way of doing things. Agile is that mindset, really is the core of what we're talking about. So Scott, if there are people who are brand new to this, if there are people who've never really heard of Agile, because clearly you and I are big fans, can you sort of describe some of the sort of core values and frameworks of Agile for people who are new to this?
Yeah, so without the long history lesson, Agile was born from software development in the software development space, where developers were being told to follow the approach I mentioned earlier, where do all the requirements up front, lock yourself away, don't see the customer, and at the end wonder why. And statistically, taking that approach in software development, up to 70% of features that are developed in that way do not get used by customers.
Wow.
That's significantly wasteful.
Mm.
So the concept they came up with is saying that we prioritize individuals and interactions with the customer and with each other. We prioritize working solutions, so delivering stuff that actually matters quickly rather than just writing loads of documentation about it and thinking that's a comfort blanket. Collaborating with customers over negotiating over contracts, and responding to change, actually welcoming change. And that's the original Agile principles. And someone that I interviewed on one of my previous podcasts, and maybe we'll link to that in the show notes, was a guy called Joshua Karitsky, and he came up with something called modern Agile. And it was a way of thinking about agility from a modern place that is applicable to pretty much any business, not just technical business. And there are 4 key elements to that. The first one is make people awesome, which sounds a bit cheesy, but it's about everything we do, every piece of work we do, how does it make our customers or our colleagues' lives better? That is like the North Star, that's your guiding principle to say, this piece of work we're about to do, how does it make people's lives better? Second one is to deliver value continuously. So it's regular delivery of value rather than long, drawn-out processes and projects that take ages. So actually being flexible to get value out quickly in small chunks and then improving and learning as you go.
Yeah, can I just, I'm just going to jump in there, Scott. Sorry, I was just thinking about my own experience with projects, and before you carry on, and I have worked on so many projects where I don't think we've delivered value at the end rather than continual delivery of value. That's quite a new concept, I think, for me. But yeah, please carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, well, that's because, as we said, most of those projects, the assumptions made at the beginning about, oh yeah, you sit in a boardroom and you go, well, yeah, the customer will definitely love this thing. So we'll spend months and lots of money building it. And then you finally get it in the customer's hands and the customer hates it.
Yeah.
So this is about saying, get early feedback often and iterate and say, do you like this? Test it out with a beta product or something like that. The third element is make safety a prerequisite. So that's safety for your customers. So what you build and deliver and give to your customers is safe for them, but also safe for the team to make mistakes, to learn, to challenge, and all the stuff that we've talked about in some of our previous episodes. So safe for the people giving the team the work to do or the individual's work to do, to say, actually, I don't think this is the right thing to do, or I think there's a better way to do it. So not being fixed. And then finally, the fourth one is experiment and learn rapidly. So that's being willing to fail. And I often quote the Elon Musk. I know he's quite a controversial character, but with the SpaceX rockets, I'm sure many people listening will know that they were trying to reuse the rockets. That was one of the things they were trying to do. So they would launch a rocket and then land it back on a pad in the sea. Quite often, many of those would blow up. And what he didn't do when a rocket blew up was sack the team. They would say, actually, we failed. Now we've got data on what went wrong. So we can now use that data to be better next time. It's a very different mindset and approaching failure and thinking about how do we experiment? How do we kill our project to find out what is the glimmer of hope that still means there's something there. So flipping on its head. So those are the 4 key things I think anybody can apply to their work and their kind of their business.
I love the fact you said make people awesome. I think that many organizations, people don't feel awesome and they feel as though that, they're never good enough. And there's certainly some internal imposter syndrome, but certainly I think many organizations, and I've worked in a few, where no matter how much value you delivered as an individual, how much value you delivered as a team, it still wasn't good enough. So I love that, making people awesome. And I was just reflecting as you were talking about delivering constant value there, and also that iteration thing. And this, as I said, is a mindset. I worked on a project a couple of years ago with a client, and it was a communications project. And they were so tied up in getting this perfect that we spent probably 6 to 8 months and nothing went out of the door, so to speak. Nothing was actually created because the organization went round and round and round in circles, talking to itself. Is this what we want? Is that what we want? And for me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Agile is about, okay, we've got something that we can show to the world, whether that's either internally to the rest of the team, to my colleague, to the customer, particularly the customer. And it's good enough, if you like, probably more than good enough. Let's get it out there. Let's get it into the world, see what happens, get some feedback, and we can keep on iterating. Am I correct in that sort of mindset, that approach?
Absolutely. Because you don't know, you literally don't know until you get something to the customer's hands.
No.
Even on these websites where they ask you, would you buy this product? Click yes and subscribe. The percentage that actually then turn over and buy the product at the end of the day is really quite low. Yeah. And you just reminded me there of an example where there was a new startup building a new chocolate bar. They didn't have lots of money, and what would have traditionally happened in terms of how do we come up with the branding for the chocolate bar and the packaging, they would have spent hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands with a marketing agency to come up with different branding. What they did was they printed out some designs, they wrapped them around a competitor's chocolate bar. They didn't actually have the chocolate bar yet. They hadn't made it. And it was like guerrilla marketing. They then put them on the shelves in a supermarket. Whether they asked permission or not, I don't know. Hid around the corner. When a customer picked up one of their fake chocolate bars, they would then stop them and say, can I ask you what attracted you to that packaging, for example? So that, again, is just saying, how can we then iterate and get it into the customers, get that feedback early, even before the product existed, is really powerful. As I said, complete opposite of what you just described, where a company kicking something around for so long, wasting time and money, and the customer's completely oblivious. You're just not getting that feedback. Feedback is a gift, as they say.
Feedback is a gift, and I think this is where, for me, from a psychological perspective, Agile is that psychological safety thing that we've talked about on previous episodes. And for people who are not familiar with that term, psychological safety, and you sort of touched upon this, is this idea that as an individual in the team, I'm bringing my best self to the workplace. But if I make a mistake, it's okay, because that's part of the learning. I'm not setting out to make mistakes, but I'm going to try my best. I'm going to try something out. And sometimes it will work. More than often, it will fail, or it just won't quite land with the customer. But that's okay, because we're learning. So for me, Agile allows people to try things out. It allows them to feel safe if they do make a mistake. Agile also, if you've got that mindset, we're delivering value. And that can increase people's motivation, because they can actually see, hey, we've been working for 2 weeks and actually something went out of the door. Something has got into the customer's hands, or we've made a small change to an internal process. And like I mentioned, I've worked on projects where they've ground on for like 2 years. I was working on a website project a while ago with a client, and I'm not kidding, it was probably 2 years of work, and the website still hadn't been updated. It's astonishing. So yeah, as I say, Agile for me, from that psychological perspective, is a stress reduction tool. It's an attitude. But going back to your practical applications, are there any sort of operational tools or tips or techniques that you could offer people that would help with that, direct, tangible business benefits that people can do, pretty quickly in their individual work or their team processes?
Yeah. So the first thing I say to everybody that I work with, and learned the hard way myself, was where the real value lay, is getting work out in the open. Getting it organized, get it out of your inbox, get it out of your Post-it notes, get it out of paperwork on your desk or in a Teams folder somewhere. Get it into a single pipeline, a single organized list that is flexible and will change over time, but is continually reviewed. And the thing at the top of that list is the highest value item. And the test is, if you only had 2 weeks left in your job, what would be the best use of those 2 weeks? And actually saying what would sit at the top of that list. And there will be lots of different elements to help you prioritize that. It'll be based on things like the highest value to the customer or the organization. It'll be how achievable it is. Is it too complex, actually? Is it something that's too big? And in which case you want to break it down. Do we have the resources to do it? Do we have the time? What are our competitors doing? There'll be lots of other things. But the first thing I would say is you need to get work out in the open. And there's so many benefits from that. One, it helps you, and I'll let you touch on the cognitive benefits in a second, Andrew, but thinking about, actually, now I've got visibility in my work, I can make decisions. I'm not getting unsure what to do next. It helps me negotiate with my boss and stakeholders and say, actually, here's all the work we're doing. Here's how we prioritized it. Work with us on how we prioritize that if needs be, because we know that teams get bombarded with loads of work. And if they haven't got the visibility themselves to be able to say, you're asking me to do too much, they just get into that burnout again. So visibility of work is key. So that there's lots of things, and we haven't got time to go into that in the whole show.
No.
But the first thing I would say is getting work out in the open and getting it into an ordered place where you can start to chip away. And obviously, you'll know that that can bring some psychological benefits, Andrew.
Yeah. I think what we've got to be careful if anybody hasn't heard of Agile is, and I'd be keen for you, Scott, to share some of those frameworks that people may have heard of, but it's not a one size fits all. And in fact, the irony of implementing Agile is not meant to be this rigid way of doing things. It's about what's suitable for you as a team, what's suitable for you as an organization. So it isn't a one size fits all approach. It is about that flexibility again. But the most important thing for me, you have to have executive support. I've worked with teams that, we want to be agile, but our senior management team, they don't get it. They're very much more that sort of opposite approach, which is called waterfall approach, which is we do things in a very set, rigid way. We've always done it this way type attitude. So for Agile to be implemented in your team, in your organization, you have to have the senior people on board. Would you agree? That's got to be something that's got to come from the top.
Yeah, and I fortunately got that. I was presenting a business case with my previous employer when I first just started to adopt this, and I showed them exactly that, the waterfall approach and the Agile approach for this project we were working on. It was a digital project, and said, here's how we normally do change in the organization. And obviously the listeners will have to go with me on this. There was a slide which showed that the value on the traditional way, the value didn't come to the end. So there's a big, it showed month for like 12 months. And then the end was a big green bar that showed the value.
Okay.
But what it also showed you was the risk went up over time, because you haven't got a product out there. You're building something in the dark. You have made lots of assumptions. So risk goes up. And then the Agile approach was small, iterative, green steps rising every month, value being delivered every month. And because you're getting that product out there and that value out there, your risk goes down.
Yes.
So I presented to this boardroom of about 50 senior leaders, and I said, here's how we do change at the moment. Here's how I now want to deliver this project. Can I have a show of hands which one you want me to choose? Unanimous, everyone chose the Agile approach.
Of course.
So that was the first way that was brought into that organization, and it was transformational.
I think it's so important that you, as I say, you've got to get people understanding what Agile means, which is this mindset thing that we're going on about. I've also seen that Agile has been used, ironically, by the senior people to try and cut costs and to make people work harder. And one of the, if you like, I would say semantics, one of the misunderstandings I think that managers often have about Agile is you just need to be more flexible and work harder. You just need to do more with less. They don't actually want the team to be truly agile. They don't really want the team to do things that they're going to test and learn and be iterative. They just want the team to work harder. So we have to be clear, anybody listening to this, that there is a, if you like, a proper way to do Agile with it, which is this iterative, test and learn, get things out the door, etc., etc. But then there's that accusation that people make about each other, or they should be more agile. And what often that means, if you scratch the surface of that accusation is you need to work harder. You need to be quicker at producing things, rather than let's improve what we do. Let's improve the processes. We just want you to work more.
Yeah. And one of the biggest challenges where leadership lets this whole thing down is wanting the cake and eating it too. So say, we'll adopt agility, we'll adopt Agile, and we'll drop some methodologies. Without the mindset, that's the first red flag.
Yeah.
But actually leadership also, for this to be effective, need to push and trust the decisions down the chain. They need to empower those teams to have the ability to make decisions without all the bureaucracy that traditionally would go ahead. Because as I always say, the teams tend to be nearer the actual customer. So they need the flexibility and trust to be able to make those decisions on the fly in terms of how work is prioritized, how it's delivered. And at the level I was at with my team, I would say to them, you're the smart people. You're smarter than me. You deliver it in the way you think it needs to be delivered, and I will support you. I will give you the prioritization and help you with that. But how it's done, I'm not going to dictate that because I don't know. That's not my skill set. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely where that leadership needs to support this through and through in terms of trust as well.
Absolutely love that. I can remember a job I worked in many years ago where there was a process that was it was a series of forms, and I won't bore the listener with what forms we had to fill out, but we had to fill these forms out. And I'm not kidding, I was in that role for about 3.5, 4 years. That form and that process did not change once in those 4 years. And everybody knew that the process was broken. Everybody knew. We would even sit around in the team meeting going, yeah, this is terrible, or I've got to do the form. Everybody knew, but nobody had the authority, like you said, at the lower level to actually make any changes. So we all knew as a team, people close to that problem, we knew how to fix it. We knew what we could do. We knew how we would change it, but there wasn't the executive support to actually get on and fix it. And then it just stayed as it was. And it was inefficient and it was broken. And it was painful. And going back to my thing, which is the psychological angle, it was incredibly demotivating because it was torturous, this form process. It really was. And everybody hated it. And we knew we had to do it every single year, yet we had no authority to change this process. So yeah, Agile has so many benefits. But before we sort of get onto some really practical tips, there may be a few bits of jargon that if anybody's heard of Agile that people may have heard of. Could you just, and I know this is massive, but can you sort of clarify for me, certainly, and maybe anybody listening to this, some of the terms? So there's things like Kanban boards, sprints, Scrum. Do you mind just sharing some of that sort of explanation of what those ideas might mean, or that they do mean?
Absolutely. And I think that's the other thing that can alienate people with Agile is terms start getting thrown around and people don't really understand what they mean. And again, if we get it back to basics, that's how you can get people to understand this stuff. But yes, terms that people would have heard are things like, as you said, Scrum. So it is one of the methodologies. Some people think Agile is just Scrum. It's just a methodology that sits beneath those Agile principles that we talked about at the beginning. And Scrum tends to be working in a fortnightly cycle. And again, was born out of software development. And I used that for a number of years before my team kind of evolved out of it. And then we're kind of framework free because we just found a way to work and live to the principles. I think Scrum is good as a kind of training wheels, if you like, as a good way to start and get into it because it has some structure. It gives some trust for leaders who may be a bit wary. And you work in a fortnightly cycle where you say, right, work is contained within that, or a week, it depends. But fortnightly is what teams tend to settle on in my experience. You say, what are we going to work on in the fortnight? You work on it. The team is not allowed to be interrupted and change course. Management can't come in and go, stop doing that, do something different because you've agreed collectively what you're going to do. The team then problem solve. They do the work. And at the end of that cycle, they present their work to stakeholders and customers and then move on to the next section of work. And that might be something that's been developed during that fortnightly cycle. There's other things in there called stand-up meetings that teams will have, whereas every day they will have a meeting. I think less stand-up meetings now due to hybrid working, but some people still do stand-up and at home and on their camera, or sit-down meetings. But the point of that meeting is to say, what are we doing today? Are there any blockers to our progress today? It isn't a check-in meeting so bosses can say to people, you're not working hard enough. It's a collaborative process. And the reason it's started as a stand-up meeting is it's meant to be short. It's meant to be no more than 5-10 minutes tops. If you're in a stand-up meeting, it's taking half an hour, something has gone horribly wrong. Yeah. The idea is if you're stood up, you're more likely to get uncomfortable. So it's meant to help the meeting be shorter. So obviously in the interest of time, we're not going to go into all the detail of Scrum. But another one you mentioned is Kanban.
Yeah.
And Kanban is similar, but it's more about a continual flow. So it isn't in a fortnightly cycle. It is just a continual flow where work just progresses, moves across. You get feedback as you go. It's quite common in like the manufacturing kind of world. Yes. I've helped some teams in the aerospace industry adopt this, but it's about managing the amount of work in progress and minimizing the work in progress so you don't have too much work going on. And it's about a flow and pipeline of work. So there are two things that people may have heard of.
Yeah, and you know, at the risk of contradicting myself, which I can do, I've said that you don't have to adopt to these formal frameworks. For me, they're like training wheels. When I've worked with teams who are getting into Agile, they started with these sort of if you like, traditional approaches and tools and frameworks like Kanban boards and Scrum and sprints and so on. But over time, they develop their own version of it. But can I offer you my take on this? Because you're the expert on this. So my understanding, and this can be as an individual again or as a team, Agile is that mindset. It's about knowing what is value in terms of the processes that we are involved with as an organization or as an individual. What adds the most value? We are customer focused. We understand the challenges and the issues faced by the customer, and we're focused on increasing customer value. And then as a team, we work as a team, and we've got the right people in the team that can solve that problem. But we're not trying to take on too much work at once. We've prioritized the work that we really need to tackle that has the highest impact. And then we work as a team. We're flexible and open and creative on how we tackle that problem or that list of problems. We work for a certain amount of time, and then we stop and we reflect. We get the value out to the customer, perhaps, whether that's our boss or our colleagues. We get their feedback. And then every so often we look back and say, what's working in our processes, what's working well, and what isn't working, and how can we improve? Would that be a sort of very poor layman's description of an agile approach?
I think you've nailed it.
Oh,
Absolutely.
good.
Yeah.
Because I just want to, and maybe could wrap up, Scott, with, I mean, as I say, you're the expert in this field. If somebody wanted to try and bring in Agile, even into their own day-to-day work, or they wanted to encourage team members, could you give me a sort of breakdown, anybody listening, a few steps where they could start maybe small and start being more agile in their work?
So yeah, as I said earlier, I think the first thing to do is start to prioritize that work. And you can do this on an individual level. I mean, people take this approach on their personal work as well, is put it into a single place. There are tools like Trello that some people may have heard of, may have come across. It's a free tool where you can have, it's basically columns. It's like a virtual whiteboard with sticky notes on. So you can, the idea is you start on the left, you put your to-do list on the left, if you want to call it a to-do list, and your highest value work at the top. And then when you've started to do it, you move it across the board into different columns like done, or there's a blocked column sometimes. If you're waiting for someone else, you can put that work into a block column, leave it there and go back to the next item on the list. So trying to get that visibility of work is really powerful on a personal level as well as in a team level. So that's the first step I would do. I would say get that and start to test it out. And if you're trying to bring agility into an organization, obviously reach out to Andrew and myself. We'll be able to help you with that. But you need to, as we've said, get that leadership on board. And the way not to do that is to come in. And I've seen this happen in companies before where they'll hire a trainer to come in and just talk about all the processes like Scrum and Kanban and completely miss the mindset stuff that comes with it. And I've seen that's where it goes wrong so many times, where people are asked to follow a process and they have no idea why they're following the process. And without the mindset that comes with it, it just goes wrong and actually can make problems worse, because people say, well, now we've got this bureaucracy added that we just don't understand the value. We don't see it. We're just being told to do it. There's jargon floating around. So cut the jargon, all those principles that we talked about. I won't repeat what you've said, Andrew. You've summed it up really nicely. The first step is get that work into a single place and then start to develop it from there. Take that open mind, take that experimental approach, test and learn, do that regular feedback. Does it work? Does it not work? What are we going to do differently? And having that growth mindset, as we've mentioned before on the show, and that process of review that we've also mentioned on the show in other episodes. To wrap up, agility is a continual journey. You don't reach like pinnacle, right, we're agile now, that's it. We need to apply that continual mindset, and it isn't a magic bullet in itself, but it can help you think differently, organize work differently, become more effective, foster collaboration across teams, remove silo working. There's so many benefits, and I've seen it work so well, but I have to stress it has to be handled carefully, and do not just think it's about following the processes. Without the mindset, it just will fall flat on its face and you will never recover. I've seen that happen so many times.
Thank you for listening to the Work Unravelled podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next one.
If you'd like Andrew or me to help you or your business, whether it is for team productivity, leadership coaching, or communication skills, our website addresses are in the show notes. Thanks, and until the next time.